Party of China is holding a dialogue with world political parties in Beijing. What can the foreign delegates expect to take away from this round of talks? And after Chinese President Xi Jinping called for sustained efforts in building clean toilets in both urban and rural areas of China, we'll be asking how serious this problem is, not only in China, but also in other less developed nations. Welcome to The Point. Live from Beijing, I'm Li Xin. The Communist Party of China is holding a dialogue with world political parties in Beijing from Thursday until Sunday along the theme of building a community of a shared future for mankind. More than 200 leaders of foreign parties and political organizations from over 120 countries and regions are attending the meetings. General Secretary of the CPC, Xi Jinping, will deliver a keynote speech on Friday. Some analysts are saying that after its 19th National Congress, the CPC will share its perspectives on global governance with international counterparts during this round of dialogue. So what do foreign delegates expect to take away from these meetings? I'm pleased to be joined in the studio by Yunus Soner, member of the Central Committee and Deputy Chairman of International Relations in the Vatan Partisi of Turkey. He is here in Beijing attending the dialogues. And by Lawrence Bram, Founding Director of the Himalayan Consensus Institute. Gentlemen, welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
Lawrence, yes, let me come to you first. This is not the first time that the CPC is dialoguing with the world. We know there has been CPC's dialogue with the world for a couple of times, and this is the first time that there's a dialogue between CPC and world political parties. What's the difference and why it is attracting so many people?
Well, from the 19th Party Congress, which was held just last month, China is now in a new era, and I think that's represented for the party as well. I think it's a very clever move by President Xi, because one of the reasons for a lot of apprehension in the South China Sea, a lot of the stress points before, are because of the historical role of the Communist Party. Back in Mao's time, in the 1960s, the party insisted on party-to-party relations with other communist parties, which often was not in parallel with the state-to-state relations. So this led to a lot of conflicts, a lot of problems and misinterpretations in Southeast Asia in particular. And now by saying, look, the Communist Party of China deals with all political parties, regardless of whether they're socialist, Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter. And moreover, the signal being, we deal with, as a government, the government in power. We're not there to try and dislodge that government. We're not going to intervene, as has been, the policy of the United States before. If they don't like a particular government, they call it a regime, and then they'll either try to disrupt it internally, or they'll just simply have regime change. The view is it doesn't matter. It could be, again, Democrat, Republican, it could be, Muslim Brotherhood, we don't care. We deal with the party that's been selected by the people through their own political process. I think this is a very different set of messages than the historical ones, which have become a kind of historical baggage for the CPC coming back to the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. Mr. Soner, being a delegate to the party, what is your take on what Lawrence just talked about, coming as one of the opposition parties in Turkey, right, and not being a communist party, but rather a united front party? What is your feelings coming to this dialogue?
Well, I would pick up a sentence that Mr. Brand used, that Lawrence used. Not only China is in a new era, the whole world is in a new era. The whole world is at the brink of a new era, where what we have known as the Atlantic system, or the Atlantic coalition, is crumbling, is crashing down. And what we have instead, because there is the law of energy. If one energy goes down, then another energy has to rise up. So who's rising up instead? It's Asia or Eurasia. So this is the context in which we see the call for this dialogue, for this meeting, and this is why we are very, very excited. And we think that this will be the rise of a new civilization, actually. We don't expect just a change of roles, okay? It's not the United States, it's now China instead. Now, we think that Asia will lead Eurasia, well, Asia leading and Europe following, will lead to the rise of a new civilization. And this is indicated in our view in the slogan of the Congress as well.
Yeah, very, very interesting. But what will you be expecting to hear, to learn about during these dialogues? What will be looking out for?
Well, we will be looking out exactly how the Communist Party of China thinks about this exactly. Are we going to build up a new civilization? There is a lot of indications for that. The initiative of One Belt, One Road is not just a matter of economic cooperation or an infrastructure thing or just building trains. It is the backbone, if you will, of this leading new continent, Eurasia. It's a strategic cooperation. And it's a cooperation built on sharing. Watch out, it's not mutual interest. When they used, when we had the Americans talking about world order, they talked about mutual interest. That is, two different negotiating parts with their own interest, and then they have the conflict about their interest. Now, it's here, it's shared. Sharing is a collective position. It is not the individualistic position that we know from the West. It is not the classical liberalism that we know from there. It is the Asian tradition of society leading.
Very interesting. So, Lawrence, do you think General Secretary Xi Jinping of the CPC will be able to lay out the vision China has for this new era that Sonia was talking about?
I just want to pick up on what you just said, because I agree completely. I mean, this is really, the Silk Road is back, and coming from your country, Turkey, right to China, the Silk Road, this is a new Silk Road. It's not just about infrastructure, it's also about financial architecture, and it's also about an enormous amount of cultural interaction and exchange. And with that, we really have, you know, and what you just said, you know, energy, when you have, you know, the collapse, the chaos theory, when things start to collapse, they completely collapse. And when things rise, they rise. And we really see now a change in the history. You know, for over 2,000 years, the Silk Road was the main economic order of the planet. It was a brief period of 200 to 300 years of colonialism and post-colonialism that broke that, and now it's back. But I think with this, you have two different political approaches. Before, you had, driven from the Atlantic Association, Atlantic Treaty side, North America, you had the view that there was a sort of monolithic globalization of Americanization that would be pushed across the planet. And here, I think what President Xi's convening is a view of very diversified localization, with a lot of respect not only for different countries and cultures, but saying, look, each country will have its own political process. It may have one party, it may have many parties, and we're going to respect that process. We're going to keep in touch with everybody. And again, whoever comes to power, China will deal with that government. It's not going to have party-to-party relations that are subversive, as may have been the case in the 60s and 70s when we were talking about a communist international and a global communist revolution, where communist parties were allied often against the government. That's done and gone with. That's the past. And I think that's why this is really a new era.
Yeah. President Xi has been talking about this idea of a community of shared future for mankind. I mean, okay, it's quite a peculiar term, and not everybody would immediately understand it. Sonia, coming from where you come from, what do you think of this term? Do you think it really says something that is important for the direction where we are going?
I think it does, and if I may speak from the perspective of Turkey, we do expect not only China, but all the Asian countries to take a more leading role globally, leading role. We Asians need to feel that responsibility. We are the continent here that has to lead the mankind out of the crisis in which it has been thrown into by the Atlantic system, by the neoliberal system, and the economic crisis and the political crisis they have there in the United States and elsewhere. So what we expect, and what I think we will see, is sharing the future and sharing the burden, sharing the responsibilities, and a more active role of China, for example, also in the Middle East. We in Turkey right now, we lead what we call a patriotic war. We have the United States arming different groups, different terror groups right south of the border. They have been responsible for the war in Iraq, they are responsible for the war in Syria, and they are preparing for new wars around the region and inside Turkey as well. So Turkey right now is at the forefront of the military conflict that Asia has with the former superpower United States. You have here in China and South Chinese Sea similar conflicts, and we are in the forefront. And here we expect that the whole Asian continent supports us and supports all the countries of the Middle East, of West Asia actually. Middle East is still the English term. West Asia, I'm very happy to use that term here, in maintaining our national unity and our territorial integrity. And I think China and India and Russia should play a more active role in that. And there is a local alliance already arising between Turkey, Russia and Iran, and I think China would be very, very welcomed in that, especially given the fact that the United States have used before some Islamic groups, Muslim groups to terrorize China as well.
However, China has kept some kind of a distance, I think, from joining any alliance of countries in resolving the Syria issue for understandable reasons, and which is also in line with China's foreign policy, that is not to interfere in other countries' internal affairs. But one thing I would like to talk maybe a little bit more about the mechanism of dialogues between parties is not binding. I mean, you know, it's just why is that important for?
It's key to what you just said, that it's not about particular alliances with any one party or interference in internal government processes of another country. China has been very firm on this position. It has been a position that has been consistent through several political administrations, and now Xi is articulating it very strongly with his vision of a community of common destiny for mankind. China is not going to interfere in the internal processes of other countries, and this view is very different from Donald Trump, who is saying America first. But if we look at the way our planet is functioning, yes, we are in a new planetary era. The interconnectivity of all countries is so complex that what happens in one part of the world affects the other immediately, and therefore you have to be thinking globally. And of course each country has its own interest, but that interest is very much dependent upon the interests of other countries. Absolutely. And I think that's what's happening with this party-to-party dialogue of multiple parties and multiple integration of a community of common destiny for mankind. That's what's happening in this town.
Okay, we have to leave it there, running out of time. Thank you very much, both of you, for coming to the show, and I hope you will take away a lot to think about. And
I'm sure.
And also, you can also communicate something useful for the Chinese counterparts as well. I think it's a mutual, it's a two-way process, right? Many thanks to Yunus Sona, member of the Central Committee and Deputy Chairman of the International Relations in the Vatan Partisi of Turkey, and also Lawrence Brand, Founding Director of the Himalayan Consensus Institutes. And you have been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. We'll take a short break and we'll be back right after this. Chinese President Xi Jinping has brought attention to a nationwide drive to upgrade toilets in China by calling for sustained efforts in building clean restrooms in both urban and rural areas. The so-called toilet revolution was launched in 2015 as part of efforts to make restrooms, often squat toilets with no paper, more tourist-friendly. Xi Jinping even mentioned the issue in his report to the Communist Party's National Congress in September, vowing to clean up the dirty and foul-smelling facilities. Now, the plan has reportedly resulted in 20 billion yuan, or some $3 billion, being sunk into installing and improving 68,000 toilets across the country. Xi Jinping said that doing so would boost the domestic tourism sector as well as standards of living. So just how bad are China's public restrooms, and how do they compare with those found in other countries of the world? Joining me for the discussion are Mr. Wang Huiyao, Councillor of the State Council, and Ravish Bhatia, a Yenching scholar at Peking University. Gentlemen, Welcome to the show. Mr. Wang, according to Xinhua News Agency, President Xi has told rural residents that hygienic toilet facilities are needed to build a new countryside. Some public restroom facilities in rural regions remain little more than makeshift shelters surrounded by bunches of corn stalks, while others are open pits next to pigsties. It is according to Xinhua reports. Is it the reality? Is it really typical of China's toilets?
Well, I thought China has actually opened up for 40 years, and then we see the great changes in urban China. You know, we have so many cities mushroomed in all parts of China. But however, I think in rural areas, probably in some areas, it does exist situation like you mentioned, like the report of Xinhua mentioned. I think so. President Xi actually now this time has called for actually endorsed the toilet revolution, which is proposed also in the UN and also in the past. But also he was giving the commentary at the report given by the National Tourism Bureau. So not only for improving the rural conditions of hygiene and the rural toilet revolution, but also to enhance the tourism facilities for tourists. Tourism facility for tourism, and so that's actually it's very significant for China to have a new image, not only in the cities but also in the rural areas. I think that is really as small as the toilet, but it shows the details of changing China, making China a better place to live. Well, but why now? Why do you think he's bringing it to such prominence at this particular moment? I think hygiene and better living standards are really in line with 19th Party Congress of making life better for the general masses, and also now we the gap between the society development imbalance inadequate is those are typical examples, I think. Sure. So now I think it's time to emphasize that, to really improve the conditions of living standards for people, particularly in rural areas. Also enhance the facility for the tourism in China to have a better image for the outside world as well. Right. Ravish, does India face the same problems?
Much like many developing countries, it does. And especially so as well in rural and urban areas, this has been a problem. And what the present administration has tried to do is to tackle this problem head on. Back in 2014, we launched the Swachh Bharat mission, which had an urban and a rural component, focusing very much on hygiene, toilet creations, and in many ways also impacting tourism by creating toilets in people's houses for encouraging homestays. And that all has led to have a significant impact on the economy. I really think what both Mr. Modi and Mr. Xi Jinping have done is that, as they're one of the few leaders who have put their weight and muscle behind such a campaign. Nowhere else in the world would I know of world leaders, at least talking about the Indian Prime Minister, going on the streets with a broom in his hand to encourage people, leading the revolution, as we're calling it now here in China, at least, head on. Not every revolution is golden. This one in particular is going to have a big impact. Is it more or less about hygiene, or is it about educating people's behavior, using more, how should I say, more modernized, more scientific, more hygiene way of living and improving the image of the country that's attracting more tourists? So what are the purposes of Mr. Modi's initiative? Objectively, they are structurally it's divided into the rural and the urban vision. Swachh Bharat literally translates into clean or hygienic India, and then they also work very coherently with the Ministry of Sanitation and drinking water facilities as well. What especially this whole mission has done is that budgetarily they've put budgets and goals which are very much in line with the sustainable development goals that Mr. Wong was mentioning at district level. So each district needs to make each district collector officer or the provincial leaders need to make their district completely sanitary. Each house needs to have a toilet and a functioning toilet at that. There are some technologically innovative ideas coming up, such as a mobile app that would allow you to know which is the closest toilet near you using a GPS locator. And these initiatives are sort of bringing about a change, not something that we see at a macro level, but very much when you're on the ground, looking things changing year after year.
Mr. Wang, for China to continue building more toilets, upgrading the toilets, what do you think is the most difficult part? First of all, I think a lot of people have been joking about people going into these public toilets and grabbing as much toilet paper as they can so that they can use it at home. Is that the kind of difficulties that we're looking at, trying to change people's behavior on top of physical upgrading?
No, I think this is really a great movement, actually, if you call it a revolution, because it really does changing people in mind. You know, the mindset has to change. Also, the good habit has to be raised, and also you have to really you know, doing the public good, and also have to think of all the others, so you can't be so selfish. So it just small things like going to the toilet is actually reflect the general you know, well-beings, and also the education of the level of the civilization actually is reflected. So I think this is tackle maybe small things, but really can enhance the you know, people's moral level, and also the hygiene understanding. So I think it's as small as this thing. Maybe you know, government paying attention to building more you know, up-to-date toilets, but then it's really raise the good habits and also cultivate the people's spirit.
Well, as I said at the introduction, China will have already added or upgraded some 70,000 toilets by the end of this year, and another 64,000 will be built or enhanced between 2018 and 2020. That's according to the National Tourism Administration. So altogether 140,000 toilets. But that is still not enough, I mean, for 1.3 billion people.
No, not exactly. I think, you know, I heard some foreign friends told me that if you go out of Beijing for, you know, for really, you go to the remote area, or maybe out of other, you know, rural area, it's really difficult for them to go, because then the tourism cannot go deep. It may be only Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou that you can really enjoy the tourism facility. But so if actually China has a tourism gap. We have only 20 million international tourists coming to China. I mean, we had
compared with France, that's not a lot.
That's not. So I think one of the things that we have to improve our facilities, improve our you know, tourism would be one of the good examples to tackle that. Absolutely. If you go to Japan, I mean, even whether you are in the cities or in the rural areas, you have very clean toilets in almost everywhere. So I think, you know, this is something we should learn, and then really changing China from those small things and from those important things.
Well, I think I must say personally, I've seen toilets already improving so much just in, you know, in the past 30 years from when I grew up. So it's already huge changes, but still it seems it's not enough. And also there's the cultural perspective as well. Squat toilet in China, and there are many other countries where people use squat toilet, right? It is not something backward, it's just a different habit, Ravish.
Absolutely. And I think as much as we can have bloggers run about, have fun with it, we can take a tongue-in-cheek approach and focus on what is necessary, on the broader aspect of hygiene. How does it matter if you sit or you squat? What is important is that these systemic changes happen inside the society, and hygiene then translates into better healthcare, reduction in vector-borne diseases, increased productivity of the people as healthcare improves. And these are the issues that I think policymakers need to be concerned with, not something what a particular blogger might be joking about.
It's actually something quite big. Mr. Wang, finally, how long do you think we can accomplish this task?
No, I think now the government calls for if it's a total revolution. I mean, if President Xi actually even endorsed on this, this thinking on this, I think it's going to be very fast. I think China has already improved so much in the past, and so much has changed. Urbanization is going on very well. So those things, I think, improving the toilet, particularly in the rural area for the rural population, also for the tourist facilities throughout the country. I think within another 10, 20 years, we should achieve that objective. I think China will be really easy to be enjoyed by all the visitors, and including the foreign visitors. Also, domestic tourism, you need that as well. And so it's not only serving for international tourism, but also for domestic.
Yeah.
We need the same standards as well.
Yeah, and people will also need a little bit of time to learn, to change their behavior, right?
Yes.
Okay, we are looking forward to that day coming, maybe a bit earlier as well. Many thanks to our two guests, Wang Huiyao, Councillor of the State Council, and Ravish Bhatia, a Yenching Scholar at Peking University. And here is my quick last point. While any mention of public lavatories can be all but guaranteed to get the blogosphere coming up with all kinds of toilet humor, the subject itself is a serious one. Irrespective of whether you prefer squat toilets, common in most of Asia, or sit-down toilets, which in the main are preferred in the West, it's the hygiene aspect which is of paramount importance. This latest drive in China might well be targeting tourist spots in particular, but the knock-on effects will almost certainly make themselves felt everywhere. We still have a long way to go before hygienic facilities are to be found across the majority of China's rural and urban areas, but the long march to this goal has already started. A great deal has already been achieved in a relatively short period of time, and as people's habits change for the better and expectations of more hygienic conditions are raised, it surely won't be long before clean and hygienic restrooms become the norm rather than the exception. That's all for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. Download the application called CGTN Live to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.